Fair warning before I start, this video is going to be more dark than anything else I've talked about on my channel, but it's a topic I found interesting, and honestly, I just can't think of a better time to talk about it. Partially because it's October, but also because this story has now reached its full conclusion. Ian Watkins was considered to be the most evil singer to ever plague the music industry. I'm sure just mentioning that name might have triggered a Winter Soldier epidemic for some of y'all, but for those of you like me who were too young and naive to know about him at the height of their career, allow me to give you the lore before diving into the horrors they brought to the industry. Ian Watkins was the lead singer for the band Lost Prophets. They were very big in the UK, reaching their commercial peak during the early and mid 2000s. So around the time where the only band I was familiar with was the Wiggles. Even after I started listening to real music, I never got into Lost Prophets. And knowing now the truth behind their singer, I'm glad I could be so oblivious, because the crimes surrounding Ian Watkins are some of the most depraved I've ever learned about. This is a man not even P. Diddy could love. The senior investigator even said it was the most disturbing child abuse evidence he had seen in nearly 30 years on the force. And I don't think they were exaggerating, because Ian Watkins was a serial child sex abuser who managed to convince some of his fans, who were mothers, to give up their children to him so that he could abuse. And if they didn't, he managed to convince them to abuse their children for him. That's unhinged. Now, I first learned about Ian Watkins from a Moist Critical video 3 years ago, and while it's stuck with me ever since, I never had a reason to talk about them because I wasn't making drama videos back then, and by that point, Ian Watkins had long since been forgotten. Until now, where as of 4 days ago, by the time this video is uploaded, the story of Ian Watkins has reached its conclusion, with him being stabbed to death in prison. Now, I know celebrating death has become fairly common in the modern landscape, and is very polarizing depending on the public figure, but this is a man who is absolutely burning in hell. I don't think there's a single soul on the planet who genuinely mourns the loss of Ian Watkins. He attempted to rape babies, and while he did eventually get arrested and was sentenced to 29 years in prison, that sentence is not nearly long enough for the amount of crimes he racked up. I know laws in the UK are a little different than here in the US, but that meant he would have been released in 2040. This was a monster. Like, this was a man who should have never been allowed on the streets again. And while we don't have to worry about that now, it's still crazy that it took death in order to ensure everyone's safety. I'll talk a little bit more about his death towards the end of the video, but I really want to dive into his criminal record now and put that on the radar, because under no circumstance should this be overlooked. Again, he was a monster, and until now, seemingly forgotten about, which should never happen, especially if we expect other monsters like him to be held accountable at some point. So I'm just going to talk about his crimes and everything leading up to his eventual arrest. His record is nothing shy of the most deplorable sex crimes imaginable that went on for years. I already mentioned he attempted to rape a baby, but he also sexually abused an 11-month-old girl, which he was blatantly open about, by the way. He bragged about having sex with kids to his ex-girlfriends at the time, and when police asked about it, he proudly said, "Hell yeah!" That's another thing I want to mention, because the story of Ian Watkins is also the story of bad police work in the UK. There were years of reports sent to their departments, and people desperately trying to get him arrested. And the police just wouldn't look at the evidence. They actually refused to look at the overwhelming evidence collected throughout the years, a lot of which was happening while he was involved in the music industry. In fact, the only reason why Ian Watkins was finally arrested was because of unrelated drug charges that led to them stumbling across Pandora's box. Just this Ouroboros of evidence against him abusing children that I don't even think rivals that of Jared Fogle. Just look at what one of the passwords on his computer was. This was not a case of separating art from the artist. This was a psychopathic pedophile and child rapist. He killed lost prophets and every ounce of success they once had. I'm not exaggerating, his crimes slowly bled into his work. In the music video for A Town Called Hypocrisy, Ian says, and I quote, "Hi kids, welcome to Town Time. Today we're going to learn all sorts of lessons." Yeah, hindsight was 2020. Now, Breakdown Media actually made a really great video talking about Ian Watkins. I'll link their video in the description, but I want to highlight some of the things they talk about because, again, I was naive during the height of Lost Prophets, and I think it's important to hear the perspective from someone who was at least active during the time of the incidents.
A quick glance at any of Lost Prophets' own tour performance shows what Lost Prophets fans' demographic consisted of, which was an army of teenage girls. Now, this on its own would not be concerning. It is quite often the case of bands of a similar genre have a similar following, but pair this with what we know now and the rumours that were around at the time, and this makes this case even more disturbing. One thing that was noted often but kept quiet along media outlets in fear of being refused an interview with the band was the amount of underage girls that were backstage at these concerts. Not just at the concerts, but backstage with the band. And media outlets have often stated that it was often Watkins that looked all too familiar in these situations.
As stated by Breakdown Media, the target demographic of Lost Prophets was teenage girls. Now, while that in itself is pretty normal amongst bands of the similar genre, what stood out in the case of Ian Watkins was he would personally invite his fans backstage at the concerts with the band, which the media cited became increasingly familiar. Now, hearing that, you might think all of Lost Prophets might have been in on what was happening, but as you'll see in a moment, that's not exactly the case.
After the charges, the band started releasing information about how they actually hated working with Watkins, and after their second studio album, Start Something, Watkins began using hard drugs consistently, such as cocaine and crystal meth. It even got to the point where the band claimed that Ian had his own private dressing room, which you could argue may be an attempt of the other band members to deny any knowledge of Watkins' disturbing behaviour. Every member of the band claims that the only illegal activity they ever witnessed from Watkins was his drug use, and that even they had claimed to hold many interventions and threatened to kick him out of the band as a result of this.
To me, it seemed like his bandmates hated his guts from the get-go, but put up with him because they didn't have a justifiable reason to remove him from the band. There are laws under the ADA that protect employees from being terminated because of a drug addiction. Now, while I don't know if there's a UK equivalent of that, what I do know is replacing your lead vocalist is one of the hardest things a band can do. So it makes sense that at the end of the day, they just decided to put up with his drug addiction and their relationship became exclusively for business purposes. However, as stated in the video, things would slowly change when Ian got his own private dressing room. Whether or not that was an attempt by the other band members to deny what was really going on, knowing now what there is to know about Ian Watkins, the deplorable acts he must have committed behind closed doors are unimaginable.
This would be the beginning of the end for Watkins, with 2012 being the year he was found out to be one of the most disgusting human beings to exist in the music scene. On December 3rd, 2012, Watkins tweeted out that he was en route to the Big Smoke to shoot our new music video, promoting the band without a care in the world. Fast forward 16 days later, and on 19th of December 2012, Watkins was charged with 13 sexual offences against children, including the attempted rape of an 11-month-old girl. This was not only a day that shook up the music scene forever, but a day that had ultimately ended Watkins' disgusting run of abuse and took away any freedom he had had. The worst bit about this could have easily have been prevented.
He is right, this could have easily been prevented. Again, Ian Watkins wasn't exactly private about his habits. A music insider really blew the lid off this whole case when one of Ian's exes gave a really in-depth explanation in regards to all the awful shit he committed, including child pornography, bestiality, and him believing he was invincible. Her name was Joanne, and she spent years gathering evidence against Ian Watkins, in order to get the authorities involved and investigate with intentions of getting him arrested.
Joanne began receiving disturbing text messages from Watkins in 2008, following an incident in a video discovered by the police in which the two are having sex, and Watkins is heard to tell Joanne that he can't wait to get you pregnant so they would have a child to abuse. Joanne then received a text message from Watkins in 2008 in which he bragged to Joanne that he had sex with multiple underage girls. Joanne, disgusted by this, went to the police immediately that same day, but unfortunately this would be the first of many instances in which Joanne was ignored.
As aforementioned, the law wiped their ass with the evidence. Now, it's important to note she did say some horrible things to Ian, but her side of the story was that it was all an attempt to get Ian to talk and gather as much evidence against him as possible for the authorities so they could trap him and eventually arrest him. And I'm inclined to believe that because she did go to the police multiple times with her phone, laptop, and a variety of other things, and just begged them to look at it, which they never did. I tried to find any reason as to why they wouldn't, but the only thing that came up was her being a sex worker for a period of time. So she's not a saint, but still, she had gathered evidence that should have convinced police to conduct an investigation against this monster, but instead, they just wrote her off as a crazy ex. The evidence she submitted included photos he sent her of him abusing children, and still, they did nothing until Ian Watkins was actually arrested. But not only did they arrest Ian, they also arrested Joanne for possession of child abuse images that Ian sent her. I can't make this shit up. Here's proof. She was arrested for possessing the evidence she was gathering against Ian. I have to imagine this is why the police never looked at any of the evidence that was submitted. Now, while she was eventually cleared, the laws in the UK must be so f***ed up if you can get arrested for simply possessing the evidence against someone for child abuse. I have no doubt the authorities would have caught Ian Watkins much sooner had they bothered to just look at the evidence that was presented to them on a silver platter. Once again, it's not like he was hiding anything. These rumors stemmed all the way back to 2004. They actually did less than the bare minimum that was needed in order to convict and arrest Ian Watkins. I won't bother reading the court documents because its detailing is very graphic. It's so vulgar, some of the acts he was found guilty of, and it's just a very uncomfortable read. Though I will mention this quote from the judge who sentenced Ian Watkins, as well as the two mothers he convinced to abuse their children for him. To quote, "Those who have appeared in these courts at the bar or on the bench over the years see and hear a large number of horrific cases. This case, however, breaks new ground. Any decent person looking at and listening to the material here will experience shock, revulsion, anger, and incredulity. What you three did plumbed new depths of depravity." I spared you a lot of the details and did my absolute best to simplify the charges, but even still, the fact he was only sentenced to a maximum of 29 years is unbelievable. No exaggeration, had he not been killed the other day, he would have been out on probation by the year 2042. I have no idea who the two fellow inmates were that stabbed Ian or what they were sentenced for, but I have no doubt they just saved a bunch of children in the future. It was first thing in the morning too, so this was like the number one thing on their to-do list for the day. They woke up and immediately went in for the kill. Also, this wasn't the first time Ian Watkins was stabbed in prison. In 2023, he was involved in a hostage situation that resulted in him being stabbed. But he survived that and made a full recovery. What a very interesting hostage to take, by the way. I can't imagine anyone was fighting too hard to get him back. The guards were probably thrilled he got stabbed, but let out an audible f**k when the medical staff eventually saved his life. Also, I don't think the medical staff was very happy either that they were tasked with saving the life of this monster. So I wouldn't be surprised if the second time around, they all just half-assed it. They took one look at the stab wounds and just pronounced him dead. The story of Ian Watkins is about as dark as it gets. He is considered to be the most evil artist that's ever plagued the music industry, and his death was nothing shy of twisted fortune. He showed no remorse all the way up to his death, so I firmly believe now that he's 6 feet under, children are safer for it. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this now that the story of Ian Watkins has reached its full conclusion. And what an ending it was. A terrible story that just happened to have some good news by the end of it. That's really about it. So